Hello guys, welcome to another episode in the 5 Minute Friday series, and in this episode we're going to be looking at hoisting in JavaScript. So in this episode we're going to investigate how the famed hoisting mechanism occurs in JavaScript, but before we can do that we need to understand what hoisting actually means. So hoisting is a JavaScript mechanism where variables and function declarations are moved to the top of their scope before code execution. And what this essentially means, where variables and functions are declared, they're moved to the top of the scope, regardless of whether their scope is global or local. Now, one major importance of hoisting is the fact that a hoisting mechanism only moves the declaration, the assignments are left in place. So keep that in mind as we go through the video. So the first examples we're going to be looking at is a variable hoisting, so var, let, and const. So let's dive into VS Code and look at some examples. Now in JavaScript, a reference error is thrown when we're trying to access an undeclared variable. And as you can see, if I try and log the variable x, it throws a reference error in the browser. And this would be correct because we've neither declared or given a value to x. Now if I go above this console and I log in var x equals 10, it gives us the value of 10, which again is correct because we've declared and given it a value. Now if we tried the same thing but placed it underneath, you can see it gives us an undefined. Why? This is because of hoisting. If we revert back to what I said earlier, the hoisting mechanism only moves the declaration of a variable, the assignments are left in place. So essentially what's happening is the var x declaration has been hoisted above the console log and pretty much at the top of the script, and the value of the assignment has stayed in place. Not physically, but because of the hoisting mechanism in the background, this essentially does this, and behind the scenes it will look something like this. As you can see, we've declared it above the console log, but we've given it the value underneath, and it gives us the undefined, and this is essentially what it looks like behind the scenes. Now the introduction of ES6 and the keywords of let and const change the standard effect of hoisting. So if I go in here and just delete these and just have a console x, and then I'm going to use the let keyword here, say x equals 10, you'll see we'll get an error instead of undefined, and the exact same thing will happen if we use const. Now unlike the var keyword where we expected the output of the log to be undefined, since ES6, const and let don't take kindly on using undeclared variables, explicitly spits out an error because we've tried to declare and initialize this underneath the console log. And this is a key difference between the var keyword and let and const keyword. However, we still need to be careful here because there is a slight difference with let and const. Now we have a variable with the let keyword of dog, and we've console logged it here, but we've given the value underneath the dog. Now we get an undefined. Now unlike let, if we declare and assign this with a const keyword, you'll see instead of giving us undefined, it will throw an error. Therefore, to err on the side of caution, we should always declare then assign our variables to a value before using them. This ensures that we always declare a variable first and ensures good coding practice. So now let's take a look at function hoisting. Now JavaScript function can be loosely classified as the following. So you've got function declarations and function expressions. Now as mentioned, function declarations are hoisted, and the way we write out a function declaration, it begins with a function keyword followed by the name, parentheses, and then the brackets, which acts as the body where we put our block of code. Now as with variables, JavaScript puts the function into memory and hoists it to the top before executing the code in that scope, and this means that I can call this function hoisting before I've even declared the function. So if I put this above the function, you can see this still works. That's because the function declaration has been hoisted up to the top behind the scenes by the hoisting mechanism. Now while function declarations are hoisted, function expressions don't work in the same way, and a function expression is when we assign a variable to this function, which you can see in this example. However, because expressions aren't hoisted, if I try calling this function expression before declaring it, you can see in the browser it throws up an error. Now you may think that using function declarations is a good idea instead of a function expression, because it gets hoisted automatically to the top, but this would be false. Just using function declarations just makes our code all jumbled up and doesn't enforce a good coding practice. And you may have declared a function somewhere random and then tried calling it somewhere else, and this will just throw up errors and undefined. So using expressions is a good thing because they are not hoisted, and because this forces us to put all our functions at the top and all our variables at the top and enforces good coding practice. Another aspect of hoisting is function scope variables. Now as we've just seen, variables within a global scope are hoisted to the top of that scope. Now hoisting also takes effects inside functions, and when a variable gets hosted in a function, it's hosted to the local scope of that function, not the global scope like we saw in previous examples. So as you can see in this example here, we've got a function with an MO host, and then we've got a console log of message, but then we've got the variable of message underneath the console log, and it throws an undefined. The reason it's done this is because behind the scenes it looks something like this. So the variable declaration, in this case var message, is scoped within the function, therefore hosted to the top of that function, but the initialization stays in the same place compared to the previous example. Now to avoid this pitfall, we make sure that we declare and initialize the variable before we use it. So all we've got to do is just put this before the console log, and as you can see the output is hoist me up. And that's how variable and function hoisting works in JavaScript, guys. I hope this video will serve as a good introduction to the concept of hoisting. Now, hoisting can seem a little bit confusing at first, but it is essential to learn so that you later don't run into error problems throughout your projects. And as always, guys, if you did like the content, please hit the like button and please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.